my name's Dave Pearson. I'm a lifelong fan of cycling, but I'm firmly in the amateur bracket of cycle tourers. So I've done a few bits and pieces, but tonight I'm here in my capacity as host to have a chat to Rich Seipp and the exploits of him and his son Tom over the last 7 years or so. So what we're going to hear today is about the adventures of Rich and his son. Rich describes himself as a lifelong cyclist also, who in the 1980s became interested in the, as then was new and emerging scene of mountain biking, and in particular found he had an aptitude for off-road and cyclocross endurance events, particularly the 24-hour events and the stuff that most people would shy away from because it sounds, the idea of doing as many laps as you can around a particular track in 24 hours doesn't appeal to most people. But as we'll see throughout this webinar, there are some people for whom it does appeal to, and they are really rather good at it. So that was Tom's cycling experience pre-kids, and then the kids arrived. And so a dilemma that I'm sure is familiar to some is how you continue doing your activities with children in tow. And for Rich, his solution was to let them join in. So after the usual trips with trailers and balance bikes, Rich noticed that his son Tom had inherited his ability to take on long distance cycle rides. And as we'll hear about in his book, which is entitled 22,000 Miles, you can guess that they've cycled a very long way together indeed. The book starts with their adventures starting in 2012 with the Festive 500, when Tom was just age 7. And then it takes us through a remarkable journey of various excursions over the UK and Europe, leading all the way to what many regard is the pinnacle of bikepacking trips, which is the Tour Divide in the US, at which point Tom was still only 14 years old. So Rich has kindly agreed to give us an overview of their adventures today, and then after he's shown some images and led us through a summary of all their experiences, him and I will have a chat and pick up on a few different aspects of the book that we can go into in a bit more detail. And at the end, as I said, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions to Rich directly. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Rich, and we'll have a taste of all the different adventures that him and his son Tom have been up to over the last 7 years.
Thanks, Dave, for the introduction. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in this evening. Some of you will have read the book, some of you won't have. So I've got a few pictures that I will flick through and just give a sort of a brief outline of how we got from, I need to share screen. So this is Tom with his very first bike with the very unfashionable stabilizers. But I don't know, I think he'd always seen me going out on my bike and thought that he would like to join in. So this is just down the road from us. This is a Seipp Valley Trail, and this is Tom's first attempt at riding out stabilizers. And as you can see, like most kids, those first steps, if you like, on the bike are quite short before they end up in the bushes. But he would like pick himself up and get back on the bike, and pretty quickly we were doing sort of 2 or 3 miles down towards the next village down this disused railway. And even when he was then 4, he was just really, really keen. So fast forward a few years, and Tom wanted to do a big trip. One of our friends helps on Land's End to John O'Groats trips, guides, riders. And Tom said, "Oh, could we do that?" And I said, well, we could do it, but we only had a week. This was like October half term. So we decided to ride the coast to coast from the east, from the west coast across to the east, and we followed Hadrian Cycleway. So this is Tom, age 7, ridden all the way across the country. But Tom decided then that he wanted to ride back to the start, which is what we did. So over 5 days, we rode 200 miles, which was quite an achievement. Fast forward to December, and a lot of you will have heard of the Rafa Festive 500. Well, Tom decided that he wanted to have a go at that. The weather was pretty poor. I think it rained every single day. And shortly after this shot here, Tom got really, really cold. You can't see, but it was sleeting, and he got into quite a bad way, really. I felt quite awful that I'd allowed him to get into a situation where he got so cold. And I thought, this was on the first day, so on Christmas Eve, I thought that Tom, he would show no more interest in the Festive 500 after getting so cold on the first day. But on Christmas Day morning, he woke me up with a cup of coffee to say that we had to go out and do it all again. So, you can see on here the yellow gloves there. They were our solution to his getting cold hands. So he wore some fleece gloves and some washing up gloves over the top to keep him warm. So 7 years old, he completed the Festive 500 in the 8 days, and was, well, certainly back then was the youngest to do it. I believe there's another 7-year-old who recently did it with her dad on a tandem, but quite an achievement. Yeah, this just gives an idea of what the weather was like. So after each of these things, Tom's always going, yeah, well, so what can we do next? Never put off by the weather, and always up for a challenge. These aren't in quite order, but Tom, when he was 10, had a go at Everesting, which is riding up a hill a multiple of times to equal the 8848 meters of Everest. Well, when he was 10 years old, he only got about halfway. I think his bike was undergeared a bit. So this is us Everesting Stoolen Dam Road in Wales, in fact, not far from where I am today. And yeah, he just basically said, oh, that's right. He'd heard that there was a youngster, 14-year-old, who'd just become the youngest to Everest. And he was 12, so he was like, oh, well, I want to be the youngest, let's go and do it. So Alpkit, they have been one of our sponsors from pretty early on. They made us this awesome tandem. And we rode this tandem from Birmingham down to Dover, and then across, or following most of a route called the French Divide, which goes from near Calais diagonally across France down to the Spanish border. But then when we got down to the Spanish border, it's like, oh, how are we going to get home again? So we could have maybe got a tandem on a plane. I don't know. It would have been pretty difficult. So we decided the best thing was to ride up the Atlantic coast, following one of the Eurovelo routes. So that trip, I think, it's about 2,000 miles. So that was our first big multi-day trip. And we'd already got our eye on doing the Tour Divide. Tom had heard about it, and I guess this trip was a way of working out whether it would be possible, for a child to do something that long. Yeah, so this map shows roughly the route that we followed. We didn't actually follow the whole of the race route. We got down into the middle, this area here called Morvan, and it was really, really hot, and Tom wasn't having a really good time. So instead of following this route, which went over the Massif Central, we took a slightly more direct route. And then one of the organisers, we were nearing the finish, a place called Mendayond, messaged us to say, "Oh, we're having our finishers party tomorrow," and I think we must have been somewhere around here. So we put in a big day and got to Mendayond to meet the finishers at the race party, which was great. And a really good thing. I mean, a lot of these people are still our friends today. We've met them a few times. One of the big things with long distance cycling for us is that we've met so many friends from all over the world now. These are the organisers. This was at a place called Reims, which was the first checkpoint. So this picture here is of the Kemmelberg, and I think it was on day 1 or day 2, certainly. We went up. This is a monument, obviously, to the First World War. This area was an important defensive point. And we got up there, and the light was sort of on the Angel, and it was just like quite a magical place, and somewhere that had always stuck with us. So this was one of the daftest things I think that we ever did. I think looking at that, Tom's maybe 7 or 8. Some friends were going mountain biking up a hill called the Calf in the Howgills. And we decided we'd go along, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that there was no way Tom could push his bike up the hill. So luckily I had a pannier rack on the back of mine, and a bit of teamwork got us up to the top and over the top. So I was talking about the Kemmelberg. A year after we'd done the Everesting, we were sort of we were looking for a challenge, but we didn't have like loads of time. We had maybe a couple of days. We were on holiday with my wife and daughter as well, so we couldn't just ride across France or whatever. So we thought, oh well, how about Everesting a hill in Belgium? And those of you who've been to Belgium know that there are lots of bergs which are cobbled, generally fairly steep hills, not very long, maybe 70, 80, 90 meters. So they're not like an alpine pass or anything. So to cut a long story short, we decided that we'd Everest, that we'd Everest the Kemmelberg. So word got out on our social media. There were so many people who came to see us. The first time I did an Everesting, I did it on my own, and I saw nobody. And this guy on the left here, if you're an endurance cyclist, you'll have heard of him, Christophe Allegaert. He cycled out, I think he said it was about 2 hours from his house, and he brought some Coca-Cola. It's a bit of an in-joke that Tom loves Coca-Cola. So he brought Tom some Coca-Cola and then some chocolate as well. And a few other friends popped back, and then next morning Christoph came again with yet more Coke, and and sweets. So yeah, it just shows what a great community cycling is. Yeah, this was at night on the Kemmelberg, and this I think this was sort of about 10 laps to go. So this picture is from another I think probably one of Tom's biggest achievements. There's a bike packing route up in Scotland called the Highland Trail 550, and I completed it the first year. It was a 550-mile route. The previous year, I think it'd been 440. So Alan Goldsmith had added on an extra loop, and I got to the end, but my bike was suffering. The bearings on the front wheel were collapsing, so I really had to sort of nurse it to the end. And to be honest, I nearly considered, just throwing in the towel, getting a train home. But I thought to myself, if Tom was here, what would we do? Would we, throw in the towel? And I was inspired by Tom in as much as I knew that he would, say, come on, let's keep on going until we can't go anymore. So anyway, I finished the Highland Trail, and then Tom was like, oh, I'd really like to have a go at that. So we went up, and Tom, this is the time that he actually completed it. They're all a little bit mixed up, these. But yeah, so we went up and gave it a go when on a year where the weather was quite bad. And Tom struggled really with a laden bike, even though on that, you see him. This is a park called the Coffin Road, which comes out of Ullapool, and I've taken a few pictures of it over the year, and none of them express how really steep it is. It literally, you push the bike and then you have to put both brakes on and then step back up to the bike and then push your arms forward. And on that first year, Tom struggled so much with the sheer weight of the bike. His power to the weight of the bike ratio was not in his favour at all. So on that year, I would push my bike up and then run back down the hill and then help Tom to push his bike up. And that first year, it was really wet, so it just took an age to get Tom up the hill. And when we dropped down into Ullapool, we bumped into Ricky Cotter and a Dutch guy called Stefan, I think, and they looked worn out. And I sort of thought to myself, wow, if they're worn out, maybe I look that worn out. And, maybe this is a bit too much for Tom to be doing. So we decided then not to continue on the rest of the route, because I knew that the rest of the route, what it had in store for us. And thought, so we rode back to Tyndrum, but taking a different route. And Tom now had some experience and knew, that one day he would be able to do it. He was keen to go back. So yeah, this was on that first attempt. So fast forward 2 years, and so Tom was 10 when he first tried it, and here he's I think, yeah, so when he's 12, he went back the week before the race started, and our plan was to make sure we got back before everybody else set off on the grand depart, so that we could see them. So that gave us a decent time constraint, and 8 days is seen as a racing time as opposed to a touring time. So this is Tom up at Beelack Horn, which is the northernmost point of the Highland Trail. Off to the right here, you can see the sea. So it really is sort of one of the northernmost parts of Scotland. And then, yeah, this was earlier. This was on that same trip. This is Ben Alder, Bothy, quite a remote place. Now, this was on the very first trip. You can see how little Tom was. We found this bothy that isn't an MBA bothy, but it had loads of coal and wood. It was a really cosy place for us to stay. And on the Highland Trail, this down here, this river, the Strathpuffer, this is Tom actually crossing it. This, depending on the rainfall, can be anything from you could literally ride across and keep your feet dry. I've seen pictures of a mate of mine, Alan, who's got to be 6 foot and maybe higher, with the water up to his waist. So this is sort of can be one of the trickier bits. But then after here, there's a whole section of hiker bike through Fisherfield. So to get through this section for anybody is quite a challenge. So this is the first time Tom finished it. My wife had messaged Alan, the organizer of the deviser of the Highland Trail route, to say that if Tom finished it, that Alan had to give him a big hug. So this is us, I think, about 2:10 in the morning at the finish. So you come down back towards Tyndrum, and as we got there, Alan jumps out, and another guy who took the picture runs up to Tom, gives him a hug, and says, "Well done," which was really quite lovely, especially as they were setting off next morning. So it would have probably been wiser for him to have a good night's sleep. Yeah, so this was Tom at the first time we had a go back in Tyndrum. That river crossing that I showed you back there, that's down there, and basically you come all the way up here through all these boulders and what have you, and then just lots and lots of pushing. That was Tom the very first time he tried it. See how tired he looks here. A few more pictures. Highland Trail. Pizza shop in Fort Augustus. Yeah, so Marion, who you'll know as Marion Esfandiari, who's a famous dot watcher, her and her partner Kevin, a bare boner, turned up to see us off the very first time we gave the Highland Trail a go. These steps aren't in it anymore, but this was near Fort William, and you had to try and balance. You can see Tom's doing here, balance the front wheel of the tyre on the side of the steps to get the bike up. I'm not going to go on too much longer because I think Dave's going to ask me some questions, and of course you'll all want to ask me some questions. But some other things done. 100 miles, first 100 miler. We didn't pick the best weather to do it. And you can see here, snow. And then we got invited by our friend Gunter in Belgium to do a 200 miler, which we thought at first was over 2 days. But it turned out that it wasn't. But the good thing was that it was in Holland. And as we all know, Holland is flat, and it was quite amusing when we looked at the Garmin at the end of the day that we'd done 215 miles, but only 600 feet of climbing. This is, I think, yeah, we went and had a go at doing the Badger Divide in October one year, and this is the Corrierack Pass, which we knew from the Highland Trail, but you can see there was quite a bit of snow that time. This was Crossfell up in the North Pennines on Tom's 9th birthday, I think. Yeah, so here we were in France. This is up in the lakes. This is when we had a go at an Everesting in Holland, which didn't go according to plan, but some things don't. Home Moss, Mallorca. This is actually the hill that I Everested first, Mam Nick from Edelside. That's yours truly. Tom at the first Dirty Reaver, Mallorca. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. This was Tom's first 24-hour race at Strathpuffer when he was 9 years old, which was, yeah, pretty tough, as you can see, lots of snow and ice. But he was, yeah, definitely an all-rounder. He was like, oh, can I have a BMX bike, so I can go and do jumps down the park. It was about fun, not just doing big miles. That's at Strathpuffer, I believe. Another Strathpuffer. So that first year he did Strathpuffer, he won the Best Rider Under 19 award when he was 9. That's, yeah, Tom having a little nap at Strathpuffer. Our teammates, Team JMC. And then this is sort of where the book ends, really. It had been something we talked about. I talked about, ever since I'd, heard that the Tour Divide was a thing, 20 years ago now. And, we make it to the end. But then we get to the end and it's as if, in a way, as if all the boxes have been ticked, as if, I think I talk in the book as it being like a video game where you've completed all the levels. So a sort of bittersweet moment. Okay, that gives you, for those who haven't read the book, gives you an idea of what the book's about. Dave is going to ask me some questions that he thought would be pertinent, and also if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A section, and we'll pull them out when Dave's had a word with me. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rich. That's a great summary of the book, actually.
Thank you.
And all the different kind of aspects to your journey, kind of your combined journey over the last 7 years. As Rich says, we do have this live Q&A open, so please fill it up with all your questions, and we'll go to those at the end. But as I read the book, I did have a few thoughts myself about different topics and themes that kind of struck me as I was reading it. I think one of the most kind of dominant themes of the book is actually just the sheer kind of resilience and perseverance of Tom, even from such a young age. And I was just keen to know that you kind of the bike rides are a way that he has shown what he's capable of. But do you think that this was part of his personality before he started bike riding, or did in some way that the bike bring it out of him? Did it kind of give him a means to kind of prove to himself and to you and to anyone else who was watching what he was capable of?
I think that because he was so young, that those traits are pretty hard to see normally, if you know what I mean. Unless he sort of said, oh, well, let's go out for a walk all day, and they walked all day and did it all again the next day. I don't know, but I'm pretty very early on, he'd fall off and crash and hurt himself, grazes his knees or something. And you see some kids and they're just like, they walk away from the bike, they're like, done with this now. But he would pick the bike up and get back on it. It didn't need to be told. And I do remember saying to him, not when he was tiny, but, when he was maybe 7 or 8, if you want to go out for a ride, that's fine, but, don't be a messer. We're going out and we're going to have a ride. If you don't want to go out for a ride, equally, that's fine. But don't be somebody who's, goes into something in a half-hearted way.
I think that definitely comes across, as does your kind of your role as the parent in this is fascinating to me as well, because I have a 6-year-old son. So kind of a lot of the similar thought processes are ones that I'm going through at the moment as well. How much do you encourage a child, and when is encouragement, when it's sometimes possible to push it too far. And throughout the book, you spend a lot of time and dedication planning the next event for Tom and being careful to build it up in stages. Was it always obvious to you what the next challenge should be for him, or was it kind of a bit more improvised than that?
It was some of the times, I'd go, oh, well, maybe we could go and do that. As I say, with the Land's End John O'Groats thing, we've still not done Land's End John O'Groats, but, I could see that fitting something that big in, to a small amount of time would make it unpleasant for him. So sometimes, I've had to rein in his ambition a little bit. But at the same time, giving him the opportunity to show what he's capable of, rather than, it's very easy to sort of go, well, I didn't do that when I was that age, so he won't be able to or won't want to. And that's not to say, and it does show that in the book, I've not always made the right decision 100% of the time. But as a parent, you will make mistakes, I think. But yeah, trying to do enough planning so that something doesn't turn into an epic. And epic's not a word that I use really, because I try to avoid them.
I think some would say most of what you do is epic.
Um,
Obviously, not in a different sense, I guess.
yeah,
I know what you
mean,
mean by something turning into an epic is.
but I always think of something epic as being, that next level of something going wrong,
Right.
which, I mean, that time on the Festive 500 where I'm pretty sure Tom was, borderline hypothermic, that was probably the nearest we got. But I did, quickly think, right, how can we resolve this situation? It's always having a plan B and a plan C, even,
And I think that pragmatism comes through in the book, actually, because you document lots of successful trips, but you also document some that didn't go to plan, and that, after a couple of days, you realise that this isn't going to work. I think it was one in particular down through France where you were trying to follow a particular
following the
route. Was it
French divide.
the French divide?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you ended up after a few days just realising we're in France, we've got an amazing journey ahead of us. Let's just
Yeah.
improvise, and you
Yeah.
had an incredible experience at the end of it, which was, in my eyes, no less kind of remarkable because of the distance you covered and the time you did it in, even if it
Yes.
wasn't exactly what you set out to do.
Yeah.
And so that flexibility sounds like it was really helpful at
Yeah, it
certain
was. It
times.
was great. I know. I can say, oh well, we didn't do the French divide, but we had a bloody great trip.
Yeah,
To ride all the way across France and then back up the Atlantic coast. The two of us was just great fun. And I'm not saying that there aren't times where it hasn't been fun, but I think that's definitely the way you want to be pushing it. At the start, we'd always go out with a view to finding ice cream, cake. I've got some lovely pictures of my daughter who she doesn't cycle with us so much anymore, but we'd always have a cake shop and a hot chocolate, and those things, make the cold hands or the cold feet, bearable.
Yeah. It did.
Yeah,
It did strike me that you seem to have an encyclopedic knowledge of what was eaten and when throughout the
yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah.
All the different meals were kind of documented with photos and things like that. And
Yeah,
uh,
that's
the
a
cafes feature a lot.
yeah, and on the French trips, every morning we're hitting up the patisseries and going and spending, 10, 15 euros on cake and more cake.
Patisseries are perfect fuel for cycle touring, though, aren't they?
They
It's
are,
a
yeah, yeah,
good
yeah,
mixture of sugar and fat. Yeah,
yes.
and delicious as well. Yeah. So you touched on it earlier with when you said that Tom almost got hypothermic on one particular ride, and there are
Mm,
other instances in the book where it's clear that Tom becomes physically exhausted, and in one
mm.
awful situation he was actually injured. Um, this must have been quite emotionally challenging for you as well, because there's a definite at those points there's a definite parent-son kind of mentor and mentee kind of relationship going on. So what kind of goes through your mind in those situations?
Um, well, from the start, once we started doing, even that first coast to coast, of which most of it's off road, always at the back of your mind, you're thinking of other road users. Have they seen me? Have they seen Tom? Um, and even cycling on the road with all the right stuff, as we well know, accidents do happen. And I did have to sort of like have a conversation with myself and say, what is acceptable, and um, I guess if you ride on the road with a child, you have to be as responsible as you can be of them. So that might mean riding two abreast, or certainly marking their offside. Yeah. Um, so that if anybody's going to get hit by the car, it's me rather than him.
Mm, mm,
Which for the most part worked fine, except as you say in one particular situation. But in that situation, Tom wasn't at fault. I wasn't at fault.
mm,
It was the guy who'd had half a dozen pints before he got in the car who was at fault.
mm.
And you do, I did say to myself, well, is that how it's going to end? Um, and but you have to. Your choices are either not. Some people are saying, "Oh, well, you've been irresponsible." Your kid's riding on the road, but should it be irresponsible to ride on the road with your child? That's a question different people have different answers for. Um, but certainly, I was of the mind back then that we should be able to use the roads alongside other bigger road users.
Mm.
I might say that we generally tend to avoid busy roads now, and anywhere where that traffic's going to be travelling quickly, or has the opportunity to travel quickly.
I think these are
But
topics that always come up every year at the cycle touring festival. The
mm,
same themes come up, about sharing road use and marked cycleways versus heavy traffic roads, and
mm,
often a lot of the chat in between festivals on Facebook and things is often about, does anyone have a good route to get into Istanbul, for instance, and
yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and so it's something that I think a lot of people in this call will be familiar with those
I
same kind of
mean,
decisions.
personally, I'm all about the off road now rather
Yeah.
than in the UK. So we went and did the Great North Trail last summer, which goes from Derbyshire, where we live, all the way up to Cape Wrath, or there's a variant that goes up to John O'Groats. But nearly all of that was off road, and that was brilliant. Because always looking over your shoulder or listening over your shoulder, how close is that lorry, have they seen me? I don't need that stress in my life anymore,
No,
personally.
no, I can concur with that.
Mm.
So there's a few questions here that kind of link into one that I had as well, which is there's a part in the book where you so obviously when Tom's very young, there's a mentor-mentee feel to the relationship while you're on the road, and then by the end, once you completed the Tour Divide, it's clear that you basically regard each other as equals on the road, on the bikes. And it seems to me like a turning point was on the Col de Glibier, where you realise that he's completely capable of outpacing you, and
Yes.
you give him the win. And it's a lovely kind of passage in the book. And so I kind of wondered how that feels to see your son kind of progress like that. And there's some questions on the chat about does Tom ever plan to do solo rides himself, and what do you see as the future? Has he mentioned anything to you about what he would want to do, and does it involve you, or is he wanting to kind of go off and do other things on his
Yeah,
own?
so that's quite interesting. So just before Christmas, one of Tom's mates had signed up for a Strava challenge to do 1250k in December or something. So Tom took himself off out on his bike, did his first solo century, as in not with me, did loads of sort of pretty big rides. So he and this week I'm working away, and he was saying, "Oh, can I borrow your bike and go out and do this, that, and the other?" So he's keen, and he's got the skills. I know he's got the skills, uh, to be sensible in terms of plotting a route, which is I think the most important thing. And he can fix a bike as well as anybody.
Well, that's great to hear, because at the end of the book, as you touched on in your slideshow at the end, after the Tour Divide, there's a collective sense of we've done our big ambition, what next? And it was kind of, as the book ended, you kind of, as a reader, you think, oh no, has the spark gone now? But it sounds like actually, given a bit of time, the spark's come back and the enthusiasm is still
Yeah,
there. If you
I think there were the two things. One thing is you've done that big thing, and it is a big thing. But what I didn't want to get into, and I've heard other people speak of this, it's where, okay, so I've done that thing which is 3,000 miles long. So now I've got to do the 4,000 miles or the 5,000 miles or the round the world or round the world twice. And, just making things more and more difficult. Or trying to pick things that are harder and harder. And I think one of the things on the Tour Divide, it was like the first time that we'd been together to the States, and the first time I'd been to rural America, and just how lovely the places were. And you'd see off to the right a ghost town, 11 miles away, and you'd be like, well, I want to go there, but I haven't got time to go there because I've got to get to the New Mexico border. So I'm becoming more and more somebody who wants to cycle tour. So like I say, we did the Great North Trail in the summer. There were some days where we only did 30 miles. We just ride for a few hours, see a nice pub, and I go, oh, can I have a couple of pints? You have a couple of Cokes, and then, just have an early one. And I think on that trip, there was only one day where we did more than 70 miles, which, to put that into context, when we did that tour, the French Divide one, I think we averaged 85 miles a day. When we did our Tour de France trip, we did over 80 miles a day. Some days were like 140-mile days, and then the Tour Divide again, over 80 miles a day. So for us to sort of go, oh yeah, 30 miles is, but it was, really pleasurable to get back to that sort of going to cafes and going and having ice cream and stopping and having a beer.
there would have been points where 30 miles would be your trip to the first cafe for breakfast, wouldn't it? So
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
So we've got a nice question here on the chat, which is, does Tom ever have days when he just wants to play video games or do something else
Oh,
other than
very
ride his
much
bike?
so. Yeah. So Tom's 16 now. He likes playing the guitar, so sometimes he can be heard in his room on the guitar. He's got a PlayStation 4, where we're often watching him, chopping the heads off Star Wars characters or something. YouTube, loves YouTube. Loads of stuff he watches on there. But I mean, yeah, he's pretty normal kid, really. And unless you asked him, he's a very modest person. So unless you knew that he was a cyclist, he wouldn't, be like, oh yeah, I'll tell you about the time that I did this, that, and the other. Um, but yeah, he was just a normal kid, really. Apart from cycling, long distance
Yeah,
cycling.
yeah. Apart from, I assume he's in the Guinness Book of Records in various ways.
No, we're
Or
not.
not,
Yeah, it's
not officially, perhaps.
there's lots of things. He's still by the youngest to Everest by a long way.
Mm.
That Kemmelberg trip, we ended up doing 10,000 meters of ascent, which makes you a high ruler.
Yeah,
Um, um, and I'm sure one day somebody will come along and be younger. But it's like a little carrot, something, or like a little seed, that you sort of think, oh, wouldn't that be a fun thing to do? Maybe.
yeah. So Kemmelberg is actually the answer to another question on the chat, which is what was the name of the place or town where the World War One memorial was?
Yeah, the
That was Kemmelberg.
Kemmelberg. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then there's a nice one here, which is, can you recommend a very child-friendly route in the UK? My friends have an 8-year-old girl. They want to go on 3 to 5 days of a cycle holiday, but they're unfamiliar with the longer routes. So for a more kind of
How
mod
old?
8.
8. Hmm. I- Well, there's the I don't know where they're based, but I would look for the disused railway lines. So
Right.
when Tom did that first Festive 500, we did a lot of the miles on the Tissington Trail and the High Peak Trail, which I think one is 13 miles long, the other they're both similar. So, and I know that with using both those trails, which sort of come off each other, there's another place called Carsington Lake that you could join up, to make, you know, I don't know, 40, 50 mile loops, something like that.
Which would be a
But
big day
Sus
out for
oh yeah,
any
yeah, yeah,
8-year-old.
yeah,
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 yeah.
of course, yeah,
So that sounds like a good. I think the disused railway lines is a great shout, actually, because always they're a very controlled gradient as well, and they always
exactly.
start and end in towns or cities with kind of supplies and bike repair shops and things like that.
Oh,
So that's six.
somebody's just mentioned that Haitian cycleway. Most of that is off road as well, and that's like 100. I mean, I don't know whether that be too much, but it's 100 miles from coast to coast. So depending, maybe do that over 3 or 4 days, and there's plenty of camping, B&Bs, etc. And it's not flat, but it's just a gradual climb up to the top,
Yeah.
both ways, really.
So speaking of family rides and things, you said earlier that your your wife and daughter are kind of have been very supportive throughout. I was just wondering whether how you managed to negotiate such long trips away with from the family, and actually whether your wife and daughter are doing equally kind of extreme activities in their own time.
Um, I don't know really. I mean, I do know. I mean, I think I mentioned it in the book that, if Tom hadn't got into cycling, I don't think I would have, been able to go off to the States, um, or being able to justify me going away,
Yeah, yeah,
to do that. So in a way, having Tom, as my sidekick or my excuse, if you like, from a personal, point of view, because I can say I am taking part in childcare, can't
that's
I?
it.
Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean?
you're doing your half. Yeah,
But um, he's learned so much, in education, from visiting all these different places. It's not just about the miles pedaled, his appreciation of all different cultures, and he tends to when he comes back from, like, say, France or Belgium, he'll read up on these places, and and stuff. So I think it has been, uh, for his overall development, a really good thing.
Oh yeah, it sounds like collectively a wonderful experience for any child. I mean, there's very few who have seen and done so much by the age of 16.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. Yeah. Um, so what have we got here on the chat? Let's just have a look. Is there anything else? Here, well, here's a nice one. It looks like you had a lot of fun. Does anything stand out as being the most fun? Is there anything that for you was a real kind of
Oh, I don't
notably
know.
memorable fun? Actually, sorry to interject,
Go
but
on.
you did say in your book that one of the most fun things was meeting all the people you've met en route. And I think the Kemmelberg trip was a real illustration of
Yeah,
that.
I mean, the Kemmelberg was amazing. I mean, I mentioned Christoph coming out, but there was, a guy who follows us on Instagram who rode out from French Lille, which must be a couple of hours, ride away. Another mate of ours, Gunter, he came out. Then Alan Goldsmith, and a couple of other the UK bikepackers, they were on the way to an event in Antwerp. They diverted and came to see us. I think there were 7 or 8 people, individual people, who came, um, to cheer us on, which is pretty amazing to say that it's not just down the road.
No, no,
Not mates from our local cycling club or something. These are people, who've properly gone out of the way. Yeah, quite humbling, really.
yep. So we've only got a few minutes left, but I I did have a particular thought of mine was you showed that wonderful tandem bike that Alpkit had
Yeah.
designed for you. Is cycling an off-road tandem as difficult as it sounds? I can't.
No, it's just like, it's like a lorry, if you know what I mean, a sort of juggernaut. So once
Okay.
you've got it going, it'll go through anything. So it had some, like, 150 mil forks on the front, big chunky tires, um, and yeah, there's loads of stuff you could ride up that you wouldn't think, or that you might struggle on a normal bike. Um, and we took it to trail centres, around the UK, and you could, obviously, you don't want to be doing any big drops, but you'd get round all the blacks. Um, there's very rarely been anything that I've not been able to get down that, I've not got. I've not got down on the solo bike. But somebody just mentioned there in the chat, a suspension seat post for your man on the back, is important, and also clipped in pedals. Because if I slam on the brakes and he doesn't know that I'm stopping, he'll literally fly off the back into my back.
I would never have thought of that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And the balance front and back must be quite odd sometimes, but maybe it's just
Yeah,
something you get used to. Actually, with panniers, it's the same, isn't it? When you've got heavy panniers on a bike, you
yeah.
get used to the balance quite quickly.
But I would recommend it, if you're riding with young kids, because
Mm,
you then don't have to think, oh, what happens if they get worn out? Because if they get worn out, they can just soft pedal,
yeah,
and you can take up the slack.
sounds perfect. Okay, so in the last 3 minutes, I think I'm checking the. Okay, so your advice on railroad roads went down well
Good.
with the question. Okay, final one here for which is what sort of accommodation do you use? Do you camp?
Yeah. So usually, so these days, Tom and I are independent. So when we went and did the Tour Divide, he wanted to be as if he was riding the Tour Divide on his own. So he had his own tent, his own everything. Um, but having said that, even though we carry a tent, we are not some stoics. So if it's like, there was one day we met a guy called Rick in a restaurant, and he said, "Oh, I'm staying here tonight. Do you fancy some beers?" So we stayed in a motel. You know, nothing flash, but you know, a little bit of luxury. You know, to get all your kit washed and stuff.
Yep.
But yeah, and in this country, you know, bothies, we quite often use bothies if we're doing the Highland Trail or a trip, though, when they're open post-COVID, of course.
Great stuff. So I think we're almost out of time. There's a lot of people in the chat wishing Tom well and sending them his best wishes, their best wishes.
Yeah,
I'd like to thank you as well, Rich, for kind of speaking to us this evening and telling us all about your adventure. The book is called 22,000 Miles. It looks like that. Father and son cycling adventure. And I can highly recommend it. And I'm sure if you have any more questions for Rich, you could probably find him on Instagram and ask him
yeah. I was
directly.
going to say Rich Pips on Instagram, on Twitter, or if you search for Rich Seipp on Facebook, you'll also find me. And yeah, more than welcome to. I'm sorry, I can't answer all your questions, but yeah, get in touch. I'm more than happy to ask any questions, answer any questions. Yeah, and thanks, Dave, for hosting me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been very enjoyable. I did enjoy reading the book, and as always, thanks to Laura and Tim for putting on the Cycle Touring Festival. We're all very grateful
absolutely.
that it exists, and long may it continue. So please donate if you've enjoyed this, and if not, hopefully Rich and I will see you at future events, or
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, as Barry says, see you out on the trails.
see you out on the trails. What a great way to end it.
Yeah,
Thank
soon.
you. Thank
Yeah,
you very
thank
much.
you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.